Good morning. Welcome to the data sessions, primarily when data in talk. Today, as we have seen that in the previous sessions, we have been covering so many different topics. Today again is an interesting day, a very important topic that we're going to cover today, which forms a core of any data architectures that you take, which is primarily on data security, right? Now, data security, you take any projects, you take any programs, be it into data, data since has been definitely being part of it. And I will also try to share some of these insights about how in an organization, since I'm part of the information security teams, currently also have been driving and have been writing data security policies, standards, and practices, and have been part of several initiatives in the organization. So I will also speak about my experience about how things have been done. But this is one chapter, this is one topic you can say that forms the essence of any data architectures, right? The data security. And in the current context of things where architectural changes have been happening, right? You see that so many different types of data architectures have been coming up. The architectures have been getting changed, right? At the same time, the integration points, the API integrations, and some of the other microservice-based architectural implementation pointers coming in. So data security is something that form the essence, the core. Even your AI/ML, AI initiatives and AI initiatives, the LLM models and all which comes in, data security teams have been playing a very crucial role as part of these initiatives. So many different types of certifications have been coming up. Different organizations have been coming up with their data security frameworks, right? So some of the common or very known popular, frameworks from ISACA, from ISC2, from some of the other ISO or ISO standards. Then you might be hearing about some of your PCI assessments and payment card industry. So these are some of the things that you'll see, keep on hearing as we go ahead. Now, as I was mentioning, so this entire architecture, the chapter will be speaking more about how you go ahead in planning, develop, and execute of your different types of security policies, different types of procedures as part of the policies, and the different areas, right? Right from authorization, access, authentications, what are the things that you are going through. Now you have that there are initially used to be single factor or basic authentications. Now we have multi-factor authentications. We have different types of token-based authentications coming in. So all of this is what, the chapter comes in and speaks about. Again, it creates or gives you a very high level overview about different these topics, but as the specificities of it, or how it is being done, it's something that is not being covered, right? So, and it also changes between industries. Like for example, when it comes to your payment card industry, right? So that is primarily your payment cards, but when it comes to healthcare, there might be some other types of regulations that would be there, or there might be some country specific. So that is something that are not very specifically covered in this, but the whole essence, what are the different types of, security controls, what are the different types of security practices, policies, or guidelines that comes in that covers this entire data security area is what gets covered as part of the chapter. Okay. Now you will see that these requirements, as I was mentioning, these different types of requirements will come from different types of stakeholders. So definitely the information security team, the cyber security team are primarily gonna drive these, or but then you have some of the specific requirements that might be coming in from your business stakeholders, from your customers, sometimes from your internal teams like the compliance audit teams. They also basically try to provide a very essential, guidelines across part of this. Then you also have different types of governance regulations, as I was mentioning, that will play a very important role. There might be different types of concerns that business might be having, the challenges that might be having. Like for example, they might be working with vendors. Now they want to share the data, but at the same time, they want to ensure that the data is not leaked, or the data is not misused. So in those kind of things, the business themselves, they don't want that the data should be should be shared in such a way that the they are able to get the business outputs. At the same time, there is no data loss that is happening as part of this, right? So these kind of things, you will see that when you're working in an organization, these different types of security requirements comes in. Then even when you are working with a lot of these third-party vendors or consultants, contractors, they are also, times where they want to have an access to your environments. Then how do you secure your data? And there are so many new types of initiatives you keep on hearing in this entire space of data security, even where the AI mod, Gen AI models, LLMs models, where now you are, let's say, for example, you want to have a chatbot, right? But, let's say the chatbot is interacting. Let's say the customer is giving some confidential, private, personal data of them, then I don't want even the chatbot to, read through it. Or if there is another person, a contact center person who is going through that chat, they should not have these details in a normal form. So it should be encrypted. So there is a lot of these kind of things that you will start seeing that whatever the inputs, we should basically have something called, let's say, a data security vault, where all your personal details, confidential data is stored in a very encrypted manner. And for that, you require a decryption of that data to be going in, to be used, should be when it is being used. But at the same time, the purpose of the data is being, achieved. So this is one area, again, where you'll see there is a lot of contractual obligations that we will keep on happening, right? So there is contractual non-disclosure agreements that can also basically influence your data security requirements. Like, so for example, you have the payment card industry standard, the PCI standard, right? Where the PCI standard speaks more about the agreement between the credit card companies with the other companies, and now you have the fintech companies and all. So how your data, where you see that the data is getting shared with the fintech companies, it will be, for the payment transactions and all, but should be protected, should be encrypted, right? So these kind of things, you'll see that plays a very important role when we start speaking about this, right? So, as I was mentioning, why data security has been so much, things, and days, you'll hardly find a days where, you don't hear about some security incidents, right? So there have been so many security incidences that has been happening round and, so, and there have been these kind of incidences where so many denial of dedicated denial of services, where you don't have that. And these are all primarily on the security side of things, where you have, let's say, prompt injections, like initially we used to have in SQL injections, the errors used to be prompted into, then so many different types of other security incidents types are there. We'll see as we go ahead. But where the attackers are trying to get hold of it, right? Even your data leakage preventions, where the data, you have so many incidents where employees who want to leave the organization try to steal out the data, or the vendors, they try to take out the data. And there have been so many types of these data security incidents that has happened where, let's say, the customer's confidential data has been leaked out, into the dark web. And these kind of things you will keep on hearing. So security is something that is very much important, right? So as per Dama, what data security, how they define data security is, it is more about the defining, planning, developing, and execution of the security policies within the organization, as well as what are different types of procedures that you're going to use so that you can start providing proper authentication, authorization, access, audit of the data, and also the corresponding information assets that are there, right? And there are three main goals that data security tries to achieve. First is they want to try to prevent as the inappropriate use of the data assets, right, within the organization. At the same time, they ensure that it is used for purpose. There is a specific reason, there is a specific purpose for which it's being used. Then you also start understanding and complying with all the different types of regulations, security policies. Maybe it might be internal policies, it would be external privacy policies, regulation, policies that might be there that will basically help to safeguard the sovereignty and confidentiality of the data. At the same time, I also the one of the most important goal is to ensure that the privacy and confidentiality needs are basically enforced and audited. Now, for that, you have, the essence of it, that the data privacy and confidentiality is something that is maintained. And normally, if you see, even though we have covered data privacy as a separate topic, you see that, to a larger extent, data privacy initiatives gets, somewhere have a very definitive involvement of the Information Security Office because, some of the initiatives, like, for example, data asset identification, classifications, the records of processing that you do, that is where, you want to identify the sensitive, personal sensitive data. These kind of things is something where, there is kind of a common goal that the teams try to achieve, and that's the reason you'll see that they would try to work together. Yeah. So here you can see that the one thing that I was mentioning, the types of sources of these data security requirements will be coming from four main teams, like the stakeholder concerns, the different types of stakeholders that they might be bringing in. So they have some of their specific requirements. So government has certain kind of regulations that would be coming in. Then at the same time, from the business perspective, right? So there might be certain requirements that might be coming in, as well as from the legitimate business concerns and contractual obligations perspective, they would be something that would be coming in. So the whole common goal is to protect the information assets within my organization. That's the common goal that everyone tries to achieve. Now, there are different types of business drivers as the chapter speaks in about. So first of the very important business driver is the risk reduction, and that's on the other side is the business growth, right? So if you see, there are two sides of the coin. So on one side you have how do you basically drive your data security initiatives is for primarily to on one side you should start reducing your risk that you can have as much as possible, and on the other side you should try to have a kind of a competitive advantage and try to look for business growth initiatives. Now these are primarily two main drivers. Now one of the very important aspect is if you start reducing the risk, there is also it adds a kind of a competitive advantage to you. In fact, a lot of organizations, if you compare, one of the very key important differentiating factor which these organizations have been evaluated, or there's a brand trust that happens is primarily on what kind of a security controls that you try to put in. Like now, banking is a very interesting example. So now if you see few of the very large global banks, even private banking, if you see as an area, when you try to use their private banking applications, the internet banking facilities, it gives you immediately, what kind of security controls they have put in. You see some organizations that they don't allow you to the idle time. If you used to keep the website idle for long period of time, you see that you automatically gets logged off, and then there are multi-factor authentications which are there that enable. And on the other side, you have some of the small banks and, not of the leading banks which are there. So there you might see that some of these things are not there. So you can see that you can copy paste your password. You can basically stay idle it for a long period of time also. And still it keeps on. It doesn't go, the session doesn't shut down, right? So these kind of things, you'll see that the once you see that if you are able to imply or you are able to apply a lot of these security controls in place, you'll see that definitely you automatically starts having some kind of a competitive advantage. Now, security risks are also associated with regulatory compliance, as I was mentioning, because one of the key important aspect is your regulations they will definitely start bringing in, and one of the important reason that they bring in these regulations is that there is critical industries which are there like banking and all, where the laws, the reputation laws, the financial laws are very, very huge and very high. And that's the reason you see that regulations have been enforced, and not only sometimes in national regulations, but then there are international regulations that also you need to comply to. Like, for example, Basel as a regulation that comes in, and there are multiple versions of Basel which are there. But one of the very essential component under your Basel regulations is also the security of your data, how you are able to protect the private, the sensitive information, how you're able to, take care. And the reason is because you also need to cover regulations is because you have your customers, which are international customers. Secondly, the kind of payments that happens, the wire transfers, the payments and all. It is not that you are doing within the region itself or within a specific boundary. Now you need to work along with a lot of these global banks, because there are trades that happens, there are letter of credits, there are bank guarantees and all. A lot of times, between the banks, between the global banks, international banks, I need to work. So that's the reason you see that these kind of regulations is not only national, but it is also some of the international regulations that I need to identify. So here you can see under reduction, what kind of different types of controls that I try doing it, right? So how we can start addressing these different, losses, and how I can start ensuring that I am able to reduce this risk, right? So there are different types of steps that are involved. So first is to identify and classify the sensitive data assets, right? So data asset inventory is one of an exercise that organizations they do, wherein they try to identify different types of all the different assets. And then as part of that, data asset identification and classification. So you try to classify them with using the different class labels like personal information, sensitive personal information, non-personal information, some of the data which might be medical data, patient-related data, some of the data which might be credit card related data, because PCI you need to identify, right? So these kind of things, you try to identify different types of classes. And it could be one is primarily based on the business domains you want to classify. One level of classification could be based on the security classification defined by, so, some of your classes like PCI and all, they'll find that security classes are ISO defined that security classes. You can use that as a reference. Or some of the other areas is based on the privacy regulations that you can have. So that is the first exercise where you try to locate and classify your data. Then what you have is the second exercise that you have tried to do is how you can start understanding how the data needs to be used, right? So you try to locate the sensitive data throughout your enterprise, right? So here, this is an exercise, very important exercise where you try to identify your sources where your these data sets are, residing. At the same time, you try to do a traceability of your data. So you have heard about word about data lineage we discussed in the other session. So there you can see that, how um, how the data is being located, how the data is traversing through my enterprises, where I want to understand that. And then I want to also determine how the each asset needs to be protected, right? So I cannot apply the same level of control for all the data assets because everything might not be so sensitive. Similarly, I don't need to mask every data, right? Similarly, I want to keep certain data which is sensitive, but masking might not help. Like for example, the customer ID. If I mask the customer ID, then the connections between customer ID with the other entities in the my enterprise data model or in my database systems might not be possible. So how I want to keep them in such a way that the data is, whether I need to apply masking, whether I want to apply some kind of a scrambling, these kind of things, why I want to save data. And then I want to identify how this information tried to be could be useful with respect to my interactions with the business processes. Yeah? So we have something called as we create something, the data process flows, which helps me to understand the different types of business processes, the steps for each of the business processes. And then we identify what are the actors, who are the actors for each of the business steps, what are the different types of data elements that are relevant part of this business, what are the sensitive among these, what are the sensitive elements which are there, right? What are the personal data which is there? So this is the kind of an exercise you do so that you can try to identify. And these are all your risk reduction techniques that you're trying to do. Right. So classifying the data, identifying where the data is residing, how the data is being saved, these kind of things will help you to be better prepared. So whatever we are doing is the kind of a preparatory work. We are not saying that after doing all of this, your data is completely, safe. But these are kind of the controls, or these are the kind of the steps that we can do. So that will help to me to be assured that yes, I'm adding those necessary controls in place. And on the other side, if you see the business growth that I was mentioning, right? So business growth is where now once I have a lot of these things in place, then the growth is something that I can start focusing on, right? So as you can see that while e-commerce has come in, it has completely transformed the way that how organizations, the interactions and transactions is happening between the different technologies, right? So even you have this concept of marketplace, which has completely, if you see, has revolutionized the entire way how the apps, the data consumptions, the interactions is coming in, right? So in that these kind of scenarios, there has to be certain kind of checks, certain kind of security controls that we should start putting in that will basically ensure or give you, some kind of a confidence level that yes, whether the data that I'm sharing with. So normally organizations have before they onboard or whether they when they do any kind of a risk assessment of any new application, they try to identify what kind of vulnerabilities that exist, what could be threats that could be there in the applications. Are there certain kind of security, security, you can say that uh, um, these are some kind of gaps that might be there that could be exploited. The exploitations could be done by the vendor. And then the data, where is this data residing, how these kind of things is coming in. So if you see, the reason that we start doing is because we start also identifying security is a very important asset. Yeah. So one is a lot of these when you try to manage the sensitive data is via your metadata, right? So metadata definitely, again, coming back, we will keep on hearing metadata coming back again and again in most of the chapters because the security classifications that you want to do, the sensitivity and all, a lot of time, if you try to do it at a metadata level, that is still will start getting applied to all the underlying data. So even if your data is increasing at a very tremendous speed, at a very voluminous speed, then that doesn't matter because you already have put in those necessary controls in place for the corresponding data, right? So these kind of things will is very much important. So you can see that tagging the data with respect to the security classifications, these kind of things is the steps that normally we try to do. And when we have a common standard, so this standard would also be extended to all the different types of business units within your department. So normally, you'll see that when these kind of controls that you want to put in, which should be at an enterprise level, it's not that it is selective only to one specific units and all, because your security, the sensitive data and all would be also something that would be applying for all of your different departments. So when you start defining these standards, the metadata standards, within the security standards, this will start providing you a lot of clarity, a lot of context of how it needs to be handled. And when you start defining them and ensuring them, then it also, start giving a lot of trust with your customers, with your partners, and then start taking you to this at a different level of as a large enterprise-related initiatives. Now, what are the different types of goals and principles that Dama mentions as part of your data security? So first is, I think we have seen the three goals which are there. Now, what are the different types of principles which are available? So the data security, it has certain kind of guiding principles. First is, again, you'll see that it is not a single person's effort, like the Chief Information Security Officer. He is not the only person who has to work on this. It's again a collaborative effect, collaborative effort, which you will see between the different types of teams. Like, so normally in an organization, while you have the information security team, you also have the IT governance team, you also have the IT security team, the application security teams, different types of security teams. Like data security is just one part of it. But if you take all the levels of your architecture security, these are different teams like audit teams, compliance teams. So it's a kind of a collaborative effort. Normally, all of these teams they work together. You have the IT team, where you want to enforce, where you want to do the asset classifications and all, asset identification. You also have to do the business intelligence. So these business teams also plays a very important role. So it's a kind of a collaborative effort. You're not doing it as a one-sided effort that these are the controls I'm putting in and just have to take it. But we normally take a more collaborative effort approach while we try to do that. Then the enterprise approach is where we start applying these security standards and policies consistently across the organization. So we are not saying that it should be only start with one department and all. We should start to enforce it across the entire enterprise. Then it should be more of a proactive than a reactive kind of a step, right? So normally we try to identify, brainstorm what are some of the possible security lapses that could be possible, right? We try to identify, we try to engage all the stakeholders, we try to overcome a lot of these organizational control bottlenecks which might be there. And this is one initiative where you'll see that there would be a lot of roadblocks, or there would be a lot of challenges that you start facing. Like giving you an example, like so we started with doing with one of the very important exercise where we wanted to do the data classification or document classification. Any new document that you want to use, you should do a classification of that document. Now, users normally would not like to have that. When you start seeing that whenever you're trying to save something, you start getting a pop-up that is asking for the classification. You'll see that randomly I will just select something, but I fail to forget that, in case if I want to share this document with someone else or if I want to keep it. So is it I should keep it at the lowest level of classification or should I keep it at the highest level of classification? So it's a very kind of a change that when you start bringing in organizations, people within the organizations, you'll start seeing that they will start challenging. They will start having a lot of kind of a, I'll say, they will start bringing some kind of a uh, challenge or some kind of a bottleneck in this adoption. So you start educating them, you start informing them, you start addressing their challenges. So that is how you start doing it. But proactively, you have to start doing it. Otherwise, you see that you don't wait for that incidents to happen, and then start reacting to it. Then there should be very clear accountability. So your roles and responsibilities should be very clearly defined. That is very important. Like as I was mentioning, the security team might be defining what are the things that needs to be done. A lot of these things might have to be enforced by the database administrators, might have to be enforced by the IT security teams, the network security teams. You cannot say that, an information security team has all the controls, right? So there is always a kind of a division of responsibility, and then everyone has to follow what needs to be done by whom. So that's the reason, and while most of the things have been are not having a lot of ambiguity and people get a clear idea, but a lot of times what happens is it becomes very much important to define it very clearly what who is going to do what. So roles and responsibilities plays a very important role. Then you'll see that metadata driven, as I was mentioning, you start doing the security classifications by looking at the metadata elements. A lot of times, you do a profiling of your data, you understand your data, and that should be sufficient. You don't have to wait for all the data to be loaded. You say that, after 1 year, we will start doing it. That's not required. Even you can start small and using the metadata, you should start doing a lot of these, implementation of these practices. Then how you start reducing the risk, how you start reducing the exposure. we minimize the security sensitive confidentiality between that to the non-production environments. So across your environments, also what kind of controls that you put in. It's a very important and interesting area because what happens a lot of times, the same controls which I apply in production, I don't want to apply in a dev or UAT environment. But then a lot of times these are the you know that the data which is there in your UAT and the dev environments are maybe copied from your production data. So still it, apply a lot of risk. So you have test data management solutions also that can help you to enforce these kind of controls in your lower environment as well. Now we'll speak about some of the different types of activities, data security activities that happens as part of these, the entire exercise. Now, these security activities, primarily, if you see, will be starting with primarily identifying what are the different types of security, I'll say the requirements which are there. Right? So, as part of these activities, you need to first start identifying what are primarily the different types of requirements that is coming in from business, from the different types of teams in these specific regulations which are there. You try to identify what kind of regulations would be applicable for you for the business perspective, right? So these kind of things you'll start seeing will be part of your initial, the activities part of it. Then once you have this, then you start defining what are the data security policy, right? Now, data security policy is something you'll see is a very comprehensive area, right? So this, why I'm saying it's a very comprehensive area is because it primarily will be able to give you all the different types of areas you need to cover, right? From key management, from data security, from data leakage prevention, from data identification, from cyber security areas, or even your password management, authentication, authorization. So all the different areas which you'll see across the data security areas, you'll start seeing that it has to be there, right? The firewalls, the inclusion directions, identity management, the identity access managements, right? Data masking, encryption. So all of these are something you'll see that they would be defined or would be covered in the data security policies. And when you define these data security policies, then primarily as part of this, you mention what are some of these things. Now, a lot of these things, when you would be doing, you take into consideration the security, the relevant regulatory requirements also, right? So different types of requirements and country-wise also it changes. Like for example, in US, some of the regulations that you might have to take into account might be the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. You have the health insurance related act related specific to health insurance. Then you have certain kind of homeland security acts and all. In European Union, you have the data protection directives that might be coming in. In Canada, you have the Canadian bill. So these kind of different types of local regulations might you have to also comply with. Then, when you're defining the security policies, the policy contents, different types of policies might be required to govern the behavior related to security. So you have the enterprise security policy, you will define the IT security policy, data security. So normally what happens is you create a data security policy, and within that you have these components all added. And then you define the data security standards, right? So data security standards will have more details about these policies. So policy will be a very high level, a kind of a guideline, what needs to be done. They might not outline every possible contingency, but standards are something that will supplement your policy, right? So they will have more details, additional details, as in like how do you meet these entire pointers which are mentioned in the policy, right? So for example, you can define in the policy that certain kind I should have very strong passwords, but how that strong passwords is been done using MFA, and what are the different levels of passwords, what are the do's and the don'ts while you're setting up the password, that will be defined in your standards, right? Then you also define what are the different types of confidentiality levels, so as I was mentioning. So is it like public? Is it like personal? Is it for confidential? Is it like official? Different types of confidentiality levels you can define. Then the regulatory categories, as I was mentioning, different types of regulations you also want to separate it out. So, like for example, something could be with respect to regulated regulation A, something that could be coming, with respect to regulation B. So these kind of classifications also you can do in case you are falling under multiple regulations. So sometimes what happens is in some countries, these are not very stringent, so you might have to, you all might be falling under the banking law, or, you have certain kind of local regulation of like a telecom regulatory authority might be giving you some regulation. So then you don't have to worry so much on the so many regulations. Then in this case, it becomes easy. Otherwise, some countries, they have, you know, multiple regulations that they need to comply to. So in those kind of same scenarios, creating a kind of a matrix, a template might also start helping. Then you also start defining what are the different types of security roles which are there. So security roles is primarily what are the different types of peoples you need to identify. The within the different teams, the role groups that you can identify. So one could be a data office you can have an information security office could be one. You have the IT security could be one group, and within that you have these role groups primarily will help you to identify that they have a similar role to play, and within that there could be multiple users. Now, what happens is why you want to have these role groups is because, as you know, in an organization, people might come in, might be coming in and would be leaving, but the role group will ensure that this group still exists, because they have a specific kind of a responsibility. Like our database administrators have certain kind of responsibilities that they have been entitled to. So even if like one person is leaving, the other people might be still be saying and they continue to perform that same kind of a responsibility. And then if a new person who is coming as a replacement joins in, then they could be added to this group. So what happens is they can continue the work, the work can still continue without any kind of a loss of business continuity. Now, this for doing this security roles, what you can do is you can also have certain kind of security kind of a role matrix that you can create, a role assignment grid which you can create. That will also help you to create this, right? So this role assignment matrix, this role on one side could be an ensure, as I was mentioning, that what kind of roles, like some of the roles that could be like a marketing role, a client manager role, HR role, right? So based on that, you can define the role assignment to which data sets that they might be aligning to. So once you have identified or classified the data into different classified levels, what you can have is based on the confidentiality, you can create this matrix to identify that which data sets or which data categories would be applicable. Then you also have the role assignment hierarchy. This would be also where you can define these hierarchical levels. Normally, when you set up the organizational structures, you define that who is reporting to whom. So sometimes these are important because supposedly the SLAs are breached. Like say, for example, information, the IT security team is not responding, and that is causing a delays. Then you know that you have to escalate to head of IT. If head of IT is also not able to provide some kind of a support and all, then it should be getting escalated to the CIO. So you also define the role assignment hierarchy, with as specific SLAs. Because security, as you know, right, these are something where in case the SLAs are not properly mentioned based on what kind of we are primarily what the security teams are. You can say that they are the different layers we have, so you have the L1, L2s, these are primarily the layers of controls, or we can say. So in case if there are no responses coming within a stipulated time, then it creates a lot of issues. So that's the reason your hierarchies also have to be defined, the workflows that you are creating that should be having the SLAs, and the escalation should also be identified very clearly. So these kind of things are also where you try to assess your current security risk also. Now, once you identify all of this, you start implementing these controls and procedures, right? So implementation is something the primarily the responsibility of your security administrators. So these security administrators, like for example, in data security, database security, so the DBAs will be able to put in those controls. Let's say, for example, I will define the security team will define that, the data needs to be masked, but the database administrator will know how to do that. So because there are so many different, there would be multiple databases which might be there. So the security team themselves might not be able to do it because there might be different DBAs for each of these databases. So they will say that they will send out a message, consistent message to all the DBAs that this has to be done. The DBAs will be able to do it and should be able to confirm it back. So it's a kind of a responsibility segregation that you do, right? So these controls and procedures that you can see should be with respect to how the users are gaining and losing the access to the systems, how the users are assigned to remove the roles from roles, how the privilege levels are being monitored, how these requests for the change accesses are handled and monitored, how the data is being classified with respect to the confidentiality and applicable regulations, how the data breaches are handled also. Right, so normally you'll see that there are frequent audits also being done. There are periodic audits. So let's say, for example, these controls have been put in. You also define what is the start date and end date. This will help you to understand and define a stipulated time for which these controls, and the frequency of the audits that basically help you to take confirmation, right? Let's say, for example, access privileges. You don't want a person to have access privileges for eternity, right? So maybe you define it for 3 months, you have requested for 6 months. Then again, you basically go and review that. If the purpose of that access privilege is to control the data availability, then again, you basically you also define you also try to define what kind of the regulatory controls could be there or regulatory categories could be there. Right. So as part of this exercise, what you try to do, what are the different types of controls that you can start putting in, right? So you assign the confidentiality levels as well. What kind of level of confidentiality could be there. How you want to have these information, controls could the confidentiality levels defined. This is again a very important, interesting area which normally we try to do. You define the regulatory categories, you define these, manage and maintain the data security also. So, one of the main important tasks is that we try to ensure these security breaches that they don't occur. So we should be able to detect them as soon as possible. So continuous monitoring, data leakage prevention, auditing of these execution of the security procedures are all something that we try to do. As we can see here, this what we are trying to do is, we try to detect them, we try to control the data availability, we how you also basically try to control the data availability, right? So we try to manage the user entitlements, we try to do data masking, we try to do sometimes we don't want to give the direct user access to the tables, so we create views and then we give access to them. We also try to have these compliance, security compliance managers rules created where we give them the direct responsibility of designing the user entitlement profiles. So this will also give when certain kind of controls of how we can start defining the entitlements, grant authorizations to these teams, right? And then sensitive data, non-sensitive data level of controls also we start putting in. Data masking we try to put in where we try to start protecting this data. Then we also try to monitor the user authentication, what kind of access behavior we can look into, what kind of accesses are required, the access controls which try to put in. That is also what we try to do. Now, there could be different type of risk in case a lot of these things are not done from a regulatory perspective. Regulatory risk could be there, detection and recovery. So a lot of times these attackers primarily take the entire data. So we are not able to recover the data back. Now, if you take critical systems and all, where all the data is lost. So, we don't, if we don't get the data back, then it is a very huge brand loss as well, reputation loss, and there is a huge fines which are also there. So these kind of things plays a very important role. Then similarly, audits might be, we might not be compliant to any kind of security audits. So these kind of things, you'll start seeing that what kind of different areas that we will have. Now, for maintaining this, what are different types of tools, techniques, and metrics that could be used? So, from a tools perspective, you can see that I can use some of these, the antivirus softwares, you have different types of antivirus softwares that will be able to take care of your viruses, the Trojans, Trojan horse, these kind of viruses, malwares and all. Then the HTTPS is again a kind of an encrypted security layer as on top of HTTP. So you'll see that this provides an additional level of control so that we can have. Then we have the identity management, like so lightweight directory access control protocols, which you also known as dial-up authentications. So these kind of protocols you can start putting in where you can manage the identity of your with your machines, credentials and all, and the SSO logins and all. You can start doing it. Then you can also have your intrusion detection and prevention softwares. Yeah, so the intrusion detection systems will basically notify the people in case if any kind of a intrusion is happening, right? So you have the detection system, intrusion detection system, and on the other hand, you have the intrusion prevention system. So these will automatically respond to any kind of unknown attacks. And in let's say if there is some ambiguous kind of user commands that is going in. So that is also. So on one hand, you try to detect it, and on the other hand, you try to prevent it. Then you also have different firewalls that you can put in. Right, so these firewalls will help you, and during your data which is moving through your network layer, it will help you to identify do a kind of a packet analysis, the data packets which are moving in. So at that level, you try to verify. Recently, I was speaking with one of, an initiative which across the countries, for countering cyber terrorism. So they try to do a lot of these where they try to look into and monitor the data which is flowing in and out of the country. Right. So these kind of will also try to prevent a lot of these data attacks within the country. Then metadata tracking is where I was mentioning, right, how the data is moving across. You try to identify your metadata, you try to classify your metadata. So all of this will come under your metadata tracking. Data masking encryption we spoke about. You try to mask and encrypt your data. Then from techniques perspective, you create a CRUD matrix. So CRUD matrix will give you a kind of a visibility of who is having a create privilege, who is having a read privilege, update privilege, delete privilege. So this helps you to understand across your different data sets what kind of privileges that permissions that people are having, right? Then you also have E also could be one additional things where under CRUD you have the CRUD, which is E is for execution. So that is sometimes people they add D for download. A lot of people they don't have download access. So you also had crude, something like cruded, right? So cruded is something is also is a newer technique which comes in. Immediate security patch deployment speaks about you need to start installing the security patches. So this is, I think, you all have start seeing where your the IT management, the service engineer teams keeps on adding regular security patches in case new vulnerabilities have been identified. So these kind of things helps in reduction of your security incidents. Then data security attributes, right? So the metadata repository would be essential to assure the integrity and consistent. So you have a central metadata repository which you have all the metadata. Now you try to classify them. You try to apply the confidential categories and all. That is part of it. Now, there are certain kind of metrics that you can start using that will help you to identify them. Now, a metrics will help you to measure. right? Now, is there a list of metrics which are already available, or is a standard? So there are certain kind of metrics which definitely falls a common, right? So for example, number of audits performed, the security systems which are installed, which are the incidents reported, how much time the incident has taken for average response time, and these kind of things you'll see that. And then across the categories you can have, but there is no end to end, right? So you can have as much metrics populated you can do. So as you can see that across your security implementations, you can have metrics. You can have metrics around security awareness. You can have metrics around data protection metrics. You can have security incidents metrics across the confidentiality data protection areas also. You can have different types of metrics. And these implementation, like, so different types of, a list has been also then provided. But again, there is no end to it. You can have multiple types of metrics across each of these areas. You can have so many different types of metrics that would become. Right. So then there are different types of terminologies that you will hear primarily across the entire topic. So these are some essential topics which comes under security. So like vulnerability. So vulnerability is, as the name suggests, is more like a weakness. Right. So if you can see, it's more of a weakness or a defect that could be compromised or an attacked, or that could be exploited, right? So for example, there are certain kind of out of date security patches which might be there and all. So normally your attackers try to keep on identifying these vulnerabilities. You see the government websites that keeps getting hacked. So like normally these vulnerabilities are the weak points or the weak links through which I can start getting into the system. Then threat is more like there is a potential offensive action that could be taken, right? So there could be a threat, right? So now there could be an insider information that could be leaking out, So they have certain kind of lacks or gaps that could be there, right? So like for example, the threats could be virus infected email attachments and all. So people, they are not aware, they open it, right? So these kind of things you'll see that when they are open it, then there could be denial of services, the entire systems could be logged in. And then there is a risk. Risk is where, there is a possibility of loss. Whatever the possibilities are there or probabilities that will be there. So you can see that what are these possible risks that would be there. So risk could be kind of a probability that threat will occur or less likely to occur. What could be the effective damage will have? What is the cost that to fix this damage after the occurrence? What would be there? What is the cost to prevent the threat? Then what is the goal or intent of the attacker? These kind of things you'll start seeing under risk. Now, there are certain kind of questions that could be helping you during exams as well, in case you are planning to appear for the exam. Like which of these following does not contribute to risk reduction? So this default for passwords will definitely increase your risk, right? If you have some kind of default password or some of the well-known passwords. Nowadays, you can see that the website starts mentioning that this password has been identified as part of a, attack, has been found. So don't use this password. So these kind of things. The risk related to each threat can be calculated based on all of these above. Okay. Now, what are the different risk classifications as I was mentioning? So there are three main risk classification, which is your critical risk, high risk, and moderate risk, based on the categories that you have. So the classification is based on what is the sensitivity of the data and the likelihood that we would be using for any kind of malicious purpose. Then you have the regulatory classifications. Multiple types of regulatory classifications could be there, where you can start having these regulatory. So you have the personal identification, financial sensitive, medical sensitive, educational records, credit card data, trade secrets. Like different types of regulations might be there, as I was mentioning. So the logic would be identifying based on what category that it would be, going into. Then you also have the confidentiality classification. So confidentiality could be general audience, for general audience usage, for internal usage, for confidential, it is restricted and then registered confidential. This again, these levels are not, either standard, but then again, organizations try to define based on their requirements as well. So this is again need to know levels. We need to define definitions of them with different proper examples so that when you're trying to classify everyone is aware of what it needs to be gets classified into. Okay. So payment card industry is an example of a more of a industry security standard, right? So a specific industry. Now, there are four A's that are associated with any of these security processes. So first is your access, then which primarily speaks about how, the access should be defined, where authorization of the data should be defined. Then the audit that you need to comply and ensure that, these controls are in place. Authentication, you try to validate the user's access when the user is trying to log in. And then you try to authorize them. And then you have the fifth element, which is your entitlement, whether the person is entitled to have an access or not. That is very much important. In case if they are not entitled, then they should not be having an access. So they primarily try to represent it what they try to are trying to define what are my different types of your security procedures, the classifications that are required, right? So that is what these kind of controls would be able to provide you. Then you have certain of your other security terminologies that you start saying. Like, for example, you have malwares. So which are like your malicious softwares that you would be useful for creating and all. So it's a malware, right? So it's like software. You have malware, which is a malicious software, right? So you have under malwares, you have different types like your viruses, Trojan horses, adware, worms, and all. Then you also have social threat, which is with respect to your social profiles, right? So this is where, people try to trick others. You trying to get access, you get a phone call, you try to get, reached out in LinkedIn and all. So it's a more of a social threat that comes in where people are being so there is phishing where they will try to give you some kind of a bait and you fall right to it. Social engineering where they will try to speak or play with your emotions and all, try to create a fear. These kind of things you will start seeing. Then security systems risk. So these could be that elements once it is being compromised, like through your network security, to your database, through injections and all, right? So they will try to get access to your data. So an examples like you have an elevated privilege and you try to use that for taking out all the data, SQL injections, default password, for platform intrusion, some of these things that I'm mentioning. So system security risk include all of the following. So phishing is not a system security, but you will see that it is more under your social engineering. Then you have security risk can be accessed based on what could be the data security, sensitivity, protection requirements, or what are the current practices. Okay. So I'll take a pause, stop here. This was more on a very high level, some of the topics under this chapter. Now there is a very interesting topic which I didn't cover much, but I'll just speak a few lines on it, which is what are different types of encryptions that are possible. So you have the hash encryption, you have the private key, public key encryption, you have the obfuscation, masking. These are terms that normally you'll keep on hearing. Now, in case you're a security professional, definitely you will have more details about it. But under masking also, like you have substitution methods, you have shuffling methods, you have temporal variance, value variance, nulling, deleting, randomization, encryption, expression matching, key matching, right? So these different types of terminology, security terminologies, normally your security officers, they are aware more of it about these terminologies. And this plays a very important role, for you at a very high level. If you understand these, what are some of these things and controls, normally the data security, teams, they are having a lot of experience. They bring a lot of, experience around this, and they normally are able to give more details about it. But at the data architecture level, if you know a very at a high level understanding of this also, that also still helps. Okay. So I'll take a stop here. This is a very high level on the data security. What are some of the activities? What are some of the goals, principles? What are essential concepts? And what are different types of techniques that you go ahead? What are different types of implementation guidelines that you take in with respect to, implementing these data security controls? And as a architecture, as a data architect, what are some of the key areas that you need to work in. Definitely, I'll say that don't see that this is something that, in case if it's not of your domain, you know that this is an area that has to be, has to be implemented. Then work along with your security officers office because they have a very good understanding about it. Work with your CISOs, and then I think they are the best person who can guide about what are some of these things that could be or that should be taken as part of this entire thing. Okay, so I will stop the recording here and I hope you enjoyed today's session. I will upload this session also.